Good morning, everybody. Welcome to part 3 of our 3-part webinar series on transition planning. Just want to really thank Velocity Advisory Group, who co-hosted this series with James Moore. It's been an extremely valuable series. I know I've heard from many who have attended the first 2 sessions of the series, just how valuable the information is. And so really thanks to Heather for working with us so diligently and putting all the time in. Of course, you'll hear from Bob a little bit later, but really appreciate Velocity's time in putting the sessions together and help coordinating all of this. We're very excited to hear from today's speakers. We'll introduce Heather and Bob in a little bit. Both have substantial experience in assisting clients in transitioning and adding value to their businesses. So these sessions are very valuable. If by some chance you missed part of the last 2 sessions, we do have those recorded, so you can reach out. You probably even received emails on that. But we do have those sessions recorded in case you want to go back and see anything. And of course, we're always happy to answer questions. Today, we're going to be hearing we have 3 different sessions that we're listening to today. These sessions will go about 45 to 50 minutes each session. Then we're going to take a brief break, and then we'll restart the next session at the top of the hour. We're going to hear about value building, extremely important. Heather's going to give us a little bit of an introduction to that, but it's so important whether you're planning a transition soon, or you're planning a longer term transition. It's never too early to start on that. So we'll hear a lot from that from Heather. Choosing and preparing a successor, and then of course family business transitions. As we've touched on throughout this series, there's a substantial number of business owners getting to the point of transition. But even for those who might have a little bit of a longer series, it's never too early to start and looking at how to maximize the business value. So this is great information to have today. My name is Mike Sibley. I'm a partner with James Moore and Company, and I'm going to host throughout today with Heather's help. James Moore is an accounting advisory firm that provides audit, tax, outsourced accounting, CFO, transition planning services, and a number of other services. I work at James Moore I lead our transition planning services and our firm's manufacturing industry group. During the sessions today, if you have questions, we want this to be very interactive. I know Heather would love to have questions along the way. We always like getting into it. There is a Q&A button. You can ask the question. I'll interrupt Heather to make sure that we can get those questions answered. And if by some chance we get questions towards the end and we just don't have time, we'll make sure we copy the questions down and get back to you on that at some point following the webinar series. So with that said, let me introduce Heather. She is the Director of Transition Services at Velocity Advisory Group, where she helps leaders and organizations navigate change and oversees value acceleration services aimed at helping organizations prepare for ownership transition. Heather has always been driven to empower others to achieve more for themselves and their organizations. She is a certified exit planning advisor and certified business coach. And as we've talked about earlier on, and so she's actually gone through the process of selling her own business and exiting a business. So she has firsthand experience of going through this process and knowing what it is to be a CEO and a business owner. And so she provides a very unique perspective to this process. And that would, combined with her background in psychology, facilitation, and training, give her, like I said, a very unique perspective. So Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you and look forward to this introduction of value building presentation.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you also for co-hosting. It's been a super fun experience. I've really enjoyed this whole webinar series and partnering with you on this. So as far as value building, yes, I've been through this process before, and this is why this topic in particular is so interesting to me. So you'll see that a lot of this just makes good business sense as we go through this presentation today. But having sat in that seat, there's this moment when I just kind of, sat back in my chair and said, wow, there is so much I don't know about how to sell a business and how to prepare a business for sale. So when I started this journey, I had been thinking about selling for a couple of years, but really said, okay, this is going to be the time that I want to do it. And I was really hoping to have that process done in, say, 6 months or so. And of course, I start the process late, and I realize that there is so much that needs to be done in preparing the company for sale. So lucky for me, when I got to the point that I was ready to sell, I was able to look back and say, I did all right. Considering what I knew and what I didn't know in the moment, I've navigated this okay. I'm coming out all right. But if I had had the information that I know now, I am confident that I would have been able to not just get more value from my business through that preparation stage, but also really leave the business and my employees in a little bit better place than I did. So I'm really excited to be able to share this. And I really hope that of all of the sessions, this one resonates with you and you take away some points from it. So let me go ahead and get my PowerPoint started here. So you know who I am, I think, at this point. So what I'd like to do is actually start. I'm going to exit out of that PowerPoint. I got ahead of myself. I'd like to actually start with a couple of questions for you, the audience. So the first one I'd like to know is basically, where are you at in your transition process? So I actually have here, we're going to do something a little bit different. I have a Mentimeter poll that I'm going to share with you. Hopefully I can work this properly. If not, we'll give up and we'll just go to, actually, let me do it this way. If I can't do this, we'll give up and we'll just go to, yeah, okay. So I'm gonna present that. All right, and then, so what I'd like you to do, if you would, those of you that are on the call, is go to menti.com. And once you get to menti.com, put in the code up here on the screen, which is 55140279. And I'd love to see just where you're at in your timeline for transition. And this is a confidential poll, so you don't have to worry about anybody knowing who you are, but we'd love to get an idea of where you're at, and this will show in real time. So those of you on the call, go ahead if you would, and just give us a sense of where you're at. 5 years or more, excellent. Whoever that is, congratulations on being so proactive. Can we get a few other people to weigh in here?
It's quick and easy. I'm 5 years.
3 to 5, 1 to 3. Okay. Okay. All right. We'll give everybody just a minute more. So that's good. I like that we're seeing, the majority of people are 3 to 5 years out. That's very reassuring. All right. So next question for you. One to 3. Okay. So next question for you, if I can operate technology properly. The sad part is that the company that I owned was a technology company. So the next question I have for you is, where are you at in your business? So give us a sense, and this will help guide the conversation for the rest of the day. Give us a sense of where you're at in the transition process. So same situation, I think it's actually the same code, 55140279. You haven't started preparing your business yet for exit, or you know about what your business is worth and you know what you need to do to focus on to grow, or you really have an understanding of where your business is at and you've got a strategic plan in place that you are executing on. Okay. Anybody else? All right. So about 60% haven't started preparing. That's actually pretty much on point. About 75% of business owners don't have an exit plan of any kind in place. Okay. So we seem to be either on one end of the extreme or the other. Either we haven't started yet and we're not quite sure what's involved, or we're pretty confident that we have a good plan moving forward. I think in each case, you'll leave with something today, but this helps me a little bit in structuring the conversation as we go. And the last thing I'd love to do is, as we're getting ready to go into this, be thinking about what you want to get from this webinar and then also the other 2 webinars, and just build feel free to throw those questions into the chat there. So we have, again, an idea of how to frame the conversation as we go today. Okay, back to this fabulous slide deck I have. So another question for you, what's at stake? What's at stake if you don't dig into this now at this stage of the game? And we just saw again that you know, about 50% of the people on the call haven't really started this process yet. So thinking through what your timeline is for exiting, what's at stake if you don't dig in and start developing this plan now? So feel free to throw some things in the chat there. So one of the things that I think you're going to see is you leave a lot of money on the table. That's what I just talked about from my experience. I'm certain that I could have gotten a lot more. I could have gotten a much higher multiple if I had started the process of preparing earlier. What about not being able to transfer your legacy if you don't prepare your organization now? What about not being able to carry on what you've built? How about the risk of rushing the process and structuring the deal wrong? Or leaving an organization that's just not sustainable. One of the biggest risks is you do exit the company, but the company is so overly dependent on you that it can't last without you. So those are just some of the things I want you to be thinking on as we go through this. And a lot of it comes down to, are you prepared to bridge that wealth gap? So one of the biggest things at stake is not being able to, is investing all of this time and energy into growing this organization and then not being able to really harvest the wealth from it at the end. So if we think of this, the reality is where your company is, what your company is worth now. Do you really have a sense of what you're wanting or needing to have once you exit that company through retirement or whatever your next big play is, right? What's that wealth gap? Do you know what that is? And do you have a plan to bridge that? And just as a reminder, when we think about building the value or what the value of your business is, we're really looking at some form of cash and sales times a multiple that's set by the industry, and that's going to give you your value. And your cash and sales, those are your tangibles. Those are the things you're going to see on your financial statements. Your multiple is really your intangibles, and that's driven by the market in your industry, but that's also driven a lot by the things that you can control within the organization. So that's where we're going to spend a lot of our conversation today. How can we increase this multiple? And so the way this looks in, somewhat real life is, let's say you have two companies that are performing pretty much on par. They're both bringing in about the same level of revenue. EBITDA looks about the same. You've got one that's performing 14% EBITDA to sales and the other is performing 18% EBITDA to sales. But when you look down into these other areas of the organization, you've got strong strategic growth in both, but your infrastructure in company A is really kind of weak. A lot of it is dependent on, say, the owner who's running the organization and hasn't really developed the teams and the structure underneath to carry that organization on should they step out. Maybe you've got poorly diversified customer base. You've got, you're only focusing in one specific area or one type of service, and it's maybe heavily concentrated in just a few clients versus company B who has a more diversified customer base. You've got a strong leadership team and a strong employee group in both. But your company culture might be stronger or weaker in one area or the other. And you've got this overdependence again on the owner. So when you're looking at both of these, if you're a buyer and recognize that we're entering into a stage of sales in the M&A world where we have a large group of people that are retiring at the same time. So you're likely to have a lot more intense competition in selling your business. So if you're a buyer looking at both of these companies, you're much more likely to choose company B over company A. So those are just, go ahead, Mike.
Just want to interject one quick thing here. And it's actually a situation I'm currently involved in helping, but you take these two exact situations, but let's just say company B, even though they've got all these strong fundamentals, let's just say their leadership can't communicate this in a way that makes sense to, particularly when you're dealing with private equity and some of these others, that can actually work against having that. So this, some of this preparation and some of this that goes into it is being able as management to, so there's another section to me, and it's something that's really become more evident, is communication of all of this stuff and how you present it and how you're able to, and that probably falls into the leadership piece of it, but you can have strong leadership, but in an inability to talk to these potential buyers about your company in a way that makes sense.
Yes, and I think that, you know, points to the need to really have strong advisors who can be there to support that process and guide that process and help facilitate too. All right, so what are we covering today? So we're going to take a quick look at the Value Maturity Index. It's just a great little model that the Exit Planning Institute uses to help business owners see how to grow value. We're going to talk about readiness versus attractiveness, some mindset shifts that I think are critical to really embody to you know, get yourself in the right headspace for growing value in your business. We're going to talk about the 7 drivers of transferable value, which are really where the meat of this is at, and then some first steps and a timeline to be thinking about as you're going through this process in your organization. So Value Maturity Index. So basically the idea here is, again, we're focusing on value over income. You want and can have both, but we really want to make sure that we're maximizing the value as opposed to maximizing the income, because you can have a tremendously high income in an organization and just have, you pop the hood and there's craziness underneath, and there's not a lot of value there. So Value Maturity Index, we're looking at identifying where we're at now. What is the value of your business and how is your business performing across these key areas in the organization that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then we spend some time, we start the process really around protecting what you already have. So that could be making sure that you have the right insurance in place. Maybe you need key man insurance or more life insurance. Maybe you need to set up wills and trusts that you might not have in place. Maybe it's about making a strategic hire that you know you need that's going to help shore up an area of your organization. So you take the time to protect the wealth that you already have before you start building more. Then we move into that build stage, and that's really readying the organization for the transition, building value in each of these key areas. And then that puts you in a position so that when you want or need to harvest that wealth, you can. And from there, of course, you're going to need people on your advisory team that can help you manage that wealth. And feel free again to pop in with any questions as we go through this. So one thing I think that's important to keep in mind is readiness versus attractiveness. And I can share a personal story around this. So when I first came into my company, we did some shifts in the business model, and suddenly we started experiencing pretty significant growth. So we were a managed IT services firm, and we were one of the first managed IT services firms in the area. So this whole idea of a subscription-based model was really new and exciting for people, and they just started, you know, signing up like crazy. So that was great. However, and so from the outside, our revenue is shooting up. We get nominated, you know, for Business of the Year. Everything's exciting. Everything's flashing. However, on the inside, much of the work was still being done by my partner. We had not hired enough staff. We certainly hadn't developed enough process and procedure to manage the growth because we weren't expecting it. So suddenly we were being flooded with new sales, and we have no real way to ensure quality delivery of those sales. So it was definitely a time for struggle. It was a whitewater period for us for sure. And so if a buyer had approached us at that time, from the outside, we might have looked pretty attractive, up and coming, you know, IT firm, you know, great sales, things look fabulous, good customer service, you know, reviews, that sort of thing. You pop the hood and you look on the inside and there's people running around like crazy, right? And so that's, a lot of us, a lot of entrepreneurs recognize that feeling of, oh my gosh, I have to have this, presentation outward, but on the inside, things are really a little bit crazier than I'd like. That is the difference between attractiveness and readiness. And when you're preparing your organization for sale, when you're preparing your organization for you to exit, you really need to be keeping both in mind. So again, good sales is great to have, but really making sure that you've built out the structure to maintain that and sustain that, especially with you not being at the helm. That's the critical piece here. So again, determining your starting point. We're going to start by getting that estimate of value so you have an idea of where you're at so that you can measure your progress on the value that you're growing. And then you rate yourself across these 7 drivers of transferable value. And so they're financial growth, strategic health, company culture, or intentional culture, depending on how you view it, leadership of people, customer capital, infrastructure, and independence from owner. And again, we're going to dive into each of these and recognize that that multiple is the part that you're really trying to manipulate here in this value growth phase, right? So you're trying to up that multiple, and you do that by really growing across those areas of the organization. To help you with this, we have a transition readiness assessment that I'm going to give out as a link at the end of this webinar. So you'll be able to go and take that assessment online. It's going to spit out a score for you across those 7 drivers of transferable value, and it'll be delivered with a 30-minute debrief with me at a time of your choosing. So I'll get that link to you at the end of this session, and I encourage you to take the time to fill that out and just get a pulse of where you're at. When we have our 30-minute debrief, I'll dig into a couple of areas that might stand out to me as areas that you might want to focus on. So let's talk about some mind shifts that I think are necessary in value building. The first is, again, recognizing that exit preparedness is really good business strategy. So this is really about going from an unintentional, unplanned growth mindset to saying, okay, I'm going to be really intentional about what I'm focusing on and where I want to go. And I'm going to stop viewing my exit as some event that's way out in the future that will happen at some point in time, and instead view this as a process that begins now. The moment you start your business, you're setting that plan in motion. At some point, you will be leaving that business in some form or another. So beginning that process really allows you to prepare in a way that's going to set you, your family, your business, the community that's supporting that business all up to be the most successful that you can be. Shifting from a business approach to a holistic approach, I think, is also an important piece of this. And that's, again, why we emphasize that piece around kind of knowing where you're at the beginning. It's not just about knowing where you're at on those 7 drivers, that's important, but also having an understanding of what your plan is going to be after you leave. Because if you are operating your company from this place of maybe you have fear over what happens once you leave your company, you don't really have a plan for retirement or for what's next, or you just haven't really thought about it, you don't really know, that shifts your mindset in how you're working in your business, and you become more focused on the now of it, and you become more reactive as opposed to proactively planning and creating your personal future. And the other piece is that financial perspective. Yes, there's the business side of it, but really making sure that you're structuring your business to be able to provide for your personal financial goals as well is big. So looking at all of it from a holistic perspective, and then crafting your business to really be the vehicle that carries you there is the way to go. And then again, shifting from creating income to creating value, and we've already touched on that a bit, I think. And it's really about transferable value too, because as you'll see, you can be operating in all of these drivers very well, but if it's not transferable to the next leader or the next owner, the value drops considerably. So let's talk about these drivers a little bit. So first, you've got financial health. And, Mike, feel free to chime in on any of this as you see fit. The financial side is not my strong area, but the idea here is, one of the big things, of course, is cash flow. And you can look at increasing the efficiency of improving cash flow through increasing the efficiency of your accounts payable and your accounts receivable. Of course, also making sure that you've got adequate insurance in place to protect yourself financially. I think one of the areas that a lot of business owners fail to think about, especially if they don't go through regular insurance reviews, is the use of technology and internet in your company and how that increases liability. And so we don't particularly, maybe some of us who are a little bit more old school in our approach and we're not really thinking around those sorts of things, we will often leave a lot of liability there. So that's an area to focus in on. Recurring revenue, driving up the value of your company through recurring revenue. And this is really about increasing the lifetime value of your customers. And we may kind of dismiss this depending on your type of business or your business model, but I encourage you to dig into it a little bit because there's some really unique ways that you can create recurring revenue. It might not be what you typically would imagine, like some type of subscription-based approach. There's other ways out there. There's other models. Do some research, do some internet searches. There's a couple of books out there on how to do it. But there's a lot of benefits that come from that. Not only does it smooth out your demand for goods and services, but it allows you to automate collections of receivables, which again improves that cash flow. It paves the way for customers to be able to buy additional services, helps against economic fluctuations within reason, of course. And it also allows you to just have more control of innovation and really focus more on value adding within your goods or services. So something to think about there. And then of course, levels of debt. You want to make sure that you're working with your financial advisors to ensure that you've got that set up where it needs to be for the size of organization that you have. And then of course, regularly reviewing it.
Heather, can I jump in real quick?
Yes, please.
About a month ago, I had a conversation with the CFO of a great family business, and he put it to me this way. He said, my responsibility is to take the data from our finances and help craft the right story that tells about our business. And what that meant to him was our growth trajectory. Are we showing that in a consistent way that goes up? Is it like a hockey stick? And if it's like a hockey stick, that might be really great to show future demand and opportunity for companies that are trying to acquire. Or if it's been very level and not changed for a long time, some buyers might think they have a greater ability to infuse technology or make some significant changes that allow a much greater return on their investment in a shorter period of time. So finance in many ways is numeric for some people. This great CFO for the business said, it allows me to tell a story that it will get us the greatest value for our assets.
I'll jump in there too. And Bob, that's one of the things I always talk about is what story is your financial statements telling us? And I think that goes as part of the regular review that Heather mentioned here is that, can you understand what your operational data is telling you? How does your operational data connect to your financial data? And being able to tell that story, because when you go out to sell your business and they're coming in for due diligence and this company, whatever that buyer is looking at, they're going to want to understand how your operational data feeds into your financial data. And if this changes or this happens, what does that mean from a financial standpoint? I think, Heather hit on all these areas and they're exactly right. But, working capital is very important. Understanding your EBITDA in terms of, where you're going, but also budgeting and understanding your budgeting and looking forward. So Bob, to your point, are we a one-hit wonder? We had one great year and now we try to go out for sale. Well, that's going to be very difficult to get the value of a one-year thing. But are we looking at a trajectory and why? Being able to explain why is this happening? What is happening in our business that is allowing, the recurring revenue? It's great, but are we able to diversify our customer base? Those are all things that you really have to look at from a financial health standpoint, and being able to tell that story and being able to make changes in your business to modify that story over time to make it more valuable is what is critical. And that's what a buyer's going to come on. Buyer's going to come in and pay you for what you've done in the past because they want that future growth. They're not going to pay you for a budget. They're not going to pay, but that budget and that trajectory and that forecast is going to give them confidence as long as you can explain it right. So going back and being able to really understand your past is really critical to this process.
Yeah, and I'll say from having been a business owner, one of the biggest struggles is budgeting and understanding like how to forecast what's going to be happening next. And I think that's like it's better to consult as early as possible and just make sure that you're setting things up correctly. Like how many times and how big of a problem is it, Mike, when people change their chart of accounts over and over again, right? It just creates chaos and havoc. And so taking the time to work with somebody to make sure that that's set up in a way that is exactly that's going to tell the story that you want to be telling, I think is really important. I like the way that you both said that. All right, strategic growth. So this is about having, again, a plan for growth. So what products and services are you offering, and are they a good fit for the market? Have you thought through that? How are you going to be growing? Are you going to be growing through the development of new products and services, or is it going to be through acquisition? Or are you planning, is the plan to expand into new territories or increase manufacturing capacity? The other beautiful thing about this is when and again, all of these, when you see our model, we've got it, circular, right? With the independence from owner in the center. And part of that is because these things all flow together and work together. And so for instance, when you're looking at strategic growth, if you can set up a strategic growth plan that is in lockstep with your leadership and your sales team, that's when you really start seeing, magic happen, right? So setting up something, making sure that everybody has an understanding of what the value proposition is and they can speak that, and that you can really get the community and your clients engaged with that. That's where you really start to see things happen. Anybody want to add anything to the strategic growth piece? Company culture, one of my favorites. And I love the quote, company eats strategy for breakfast. It does certainly in a lot of ways. The idea here is being intentional versus unintentional. And, again, if you think of those organizations, there are plenty of organizations that from the outside look like they are doing really well. They are achieving some sales. They look like they're performing well. But when, again, you look under the hood, you might see shady behaviors that you'd rather not see in your organization. You might see a lot of issues around recruitment and retention. And I'll add that I haven't worked with a company in the last 2 years that has not complained about the ability to find and maintain staff. And one of the things that we always go to with Velocity, that we always help them focus on, is recognize that company culture is really kind of your secret weapon against attracting and retaining talent. Because if you're creating an environment where people want to be, you're attracting the right types of leaders, the right types of team members that are embodying the values of your organization, that are speaking that, they're going to go out and they're going to bring their friends, right? And sure, a heck of a lot easier to grow an organization when you've got people coming to you, as opposed to having to invest, tons and tons of dollars into trying to go out and find people and convince them to come work for you. So building a strong, healthy company culture and then marketing that, just like you would market your goods and services, is an excellent way to help with your recruitment and retention challenges. So really encourage you to focus in on that. And that's something that Velocity, of course, has a lot of expertise around, but building a culture that, knowing what your values are, knowing what the behaviors, and we call them essential behaviors. So what are the essential behaviors that you want to see your organization demonstrating on a daily basis, and then just talking that talk constantly. That's really how you start creating a good, strong company culture. Bob, I see you smiling. Do you want to add anything?
This is a really interesting one in terms of how you build value based for your own company and or for the potential of acquisition. There's a fairly well-known UPenn professor, Adam Grant, and he posed a great question. And he said, what happens at your company that wouldn't happen in other companies? And that's a great culture clarifying question. And for family businesses in particular, this is one of the ones that I really find fascinating. I have some great businesses that I'm privileged to work with where they have some certain things in their own family business culture that wouldn't take place in anywhere else. And that's what makes them very unique, which is super for the building of value internally. However, you've got to be mindful that for potential suitors that might want to buy your company, is that a value that would make them want to purchase you and think that they can integrate you? Or is it something that would serve as an impediment? And when we talked about the kind of understanding of where you get on the multiple range, there's a number of very unique family business culture components that add and move that piece up to a higher multiple. And there's some that are so unique that move them down. We don't work on Friday afternoons, or the Chick-fil-A business early on, not working on Sundays. Some companies might see extra value in those unique culture components, and just be mindful that some other acquiring companies might devalue a company for something that's so unique to your fabric and framework.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just going to jump in and, the culture and the engagement part, this is where it does cross over into the financial health by, I'm a big proponent of allowing employees to see certain financial data and certain operational data that makes sense. I think getting them engaged in understanding that story that Bob mentioned earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to share shareholder payroll information or distributions or certain, not every piece of it, but there's plenty of pieces that I think make sense. And when you push that down the line to a potential sale of the company, that acquirer is going to want to understand what you're going to want to talk to key members of management, and they're going to want to see how they understand the financials, how they react, how are they involved in the budgeting process, how are they involved in being able to take a section, their responsibility, and connect what their operations are doing, what they're responsible for, and what the output of the company is financially. So I think that's something that also needs to be connected here for business owners.
Yes, definitely. And the next one also ties into this quite a bit, and that's your leadership and people. And so what we're talking about here is less specifically about the values, beliefs, and behaviors, which are really what shape the culture. And this is more specifically about the people that you have on the team and their competencies and skills, right? So is your leadership, do they have the competencies that they need to be able to be effective? Can they communicate well? Can they lead groups and break down silos? Can they hold their teams accountable? Can they delegate well? Are they leading to the vision, mission, and values, and do they understand that? It's also about how much you're actually taking the time to develop these people. Are there plans in place to grow your leadership? Because it's, when you're thinking about succession planning, which we're going to talk a lot about in a very short period of time now, but when you're thinking about succession planning, one of the reasons that that's critical is because without when your leaders don't know what the plan is for them or how they're going to fit into that, they're much more likely to choose their plan B. There's no reason for them to stick around. So really developing out that plan so that they know what's in it, what the plan and the path looks like for them. They can see how they're going to be adding value and they're going to get what they want out of their career and staying with your organization. And also it's building trust in the organization that you're taking the time to think through what the organization needs to be successful long-term, right? So all of these things together, but critically making sure that you're mapping out a plan for leadership going into the future and making sure you're taking the time to develop your leadership team, not just on the technical side, but on the soft skill side too, right? Making sure that they understand how to actually lead. Again, I see some twitching in the chair. So do either of you want to add anything to that? No? Okay. And then customer capital. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. This is around, making sure that you've got a diversified customer base that you're not putting all of your eggs in one or two baskets. That happens a lot, especially early on when we're growing our organizations. But you want to make sure that at some point you start to diversify that. And that's not just diversification of customers, but also good idea to have a selection of services that can be applied in different types of environments. So if you think about, for instance, COVID, if you had one or two primary goods or services that were heavily impacted by that and didn't have anything else to rely on during that time, of course, it makes it a little bit harder. So diversification is the name of the game. And then, of course, building brand loyalty and building some customer evangelism. And I think, you know, when you have to recognize that when it comes to customer service, you're not just competing with other people in your industry anymore. You're competing with the best customer experiences that people have. So if you think about what customer experiences like shopping, say, from Amazon, right? Like that's the mindset that people have around customer service these days. So you've got to make sure that you're really at the top of the game when it comes to this. So what are you doing to ensure that your customers and your clients are experiencing the exact type of experience that you want them to be having throughout their life cycle with you? So that's where customer capital comes in, really, and looking at that and investing in that. Also making sure that that relationship that they have is not just with you or maybe one or two key leaders, but that it's the organization as a whole. They know James Moore to be X, Y, or Z, or they know Velocity, not just Heather, not just Bob, not just Mike.
Heather, great comment. I had a conversation even just this week with a large multi-generation construction family business, and they were in the process of transitioning from a second generation to a third generation. And the customers had a very strong connection to the second generation leader. And with the next generation coming up, during that transition, they would say to the brand new leader, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm only going to talk to your mom in this business. And she's the only one that's been good for me. And so the value of that business is greatly compromised because the transition of direct relationship, trust building has not been really formally put in place for long enough to allow it to be successful. And those are some of the critical things in terms of building value and independence from owner that you've pointed out that need to be paid attention to.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Infrastructure. I was talking to you, I was alluding to that, or not really alluding, but I was sharing my story about that and how early on we hadn't had the time or the skill built yet to really know even how to set that up and get that in place. And so infrastructure really is key because, again, that is laying the framework for the company to be sustainable after you step out, after you take away all of your industry, organizational knowledge. When that leaves the organization, you've got to make sure that you have embedded it in the organization and in your leadership. That didn't come out right, but you know what I mean, I think. You know what I mean. So the idea here is key performance indicators, understanding how you're measuring success, and your team knows how to measure it as well. They've got those numbers. They know what they should be tracking. They know how their efforts are influencing those numbers, right? Creating as much efficiency of operations as possible. And some of that is, going to be in having the right people in the right seats on the bus, again, feeding back into that leadership and people piece. Some of that is making sure that you've got the right technology and systems in place. Have you updated your infrastructure? Have you updated your equipment and your software applications on all of those things, right? So really taking time to map out the areas that you're weak and improving those before you exit is key.
I'll just add that it's a super critical area. Especially once you get into a point of having an actual interaction with buyers, due diligence process, they will look at these things. And this leads to a confident, not only in the ability to continue operating the business after the acquisition, but in their confidence in the systems in place and the reliability of the past performance. This is something they're going to look at. And so oftentimes, and I think going back to your poll earlier, where there was a number of people in that 3 to 5 years, that's great. Get it in place now, because you want that infrastructure really working for a good couple of years or so, if at all possible. So it's flowing well, and the team is able to report on it, and they can see that consistency in how your operations work and how this infrastructure is working. So it's key to get it in place and make sure it's operating effectively as soon as possible before you go out for, potential sale.
I mean, it demonstrates that it's scalable.
Yeah. Real quick, real life example. I worked with a family brokerage business, and they had an internal technology system that they did all of their ordering and purchasing on, that was solely supported by an external organization and one individual, and they sunsetted the system, and the business had no way to support it. And fortunately, they just sold last year, but their first priority when I started working with them was to transition away from that system, because it was so critical to the delivery of their goods, but they had no structure and support outside of a single individual on a sunsetted system. It was terrible.
Yeah. I'm seeing the time, so I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Next up is independence from owner. And, again, you can have all of those other areas in the organization operating flawlessly because you're a superhero, and you're what's the person that runs the circus? You've got that down, right? And everything is flowing, is working wonderfully, but you're getting ready to step out. So what happens to the organization when you do that? What's the independence from owner like here? Can this company operate without you? And a great test is to take a long vacation and see what happens, see where things are at when you come back. I remember being terrified the first time that I did that. But if you aren't thinking about your organization as it stands today, if you weren't able to go back tomorrow, would people know what to do without you? And I think, don't underestimate this one, or the importance of addressing it sooner rather than later, because I don't think I had it in this slide deck, but if we recognize that 50% of exits aren't happening when you ideally want them to, and you've had time to plan, they're happening because of those one of those 5 Ds: death, disability, divorce, distress, or disagreement, right? So addressing this one as soon as possible, building out all of the process you need to be able to hand off your responsibilities early on in a systematic way is going to set you up best for success. So those are the 7 drivers of transferable value. That's what you can be focusing on. So, where do you start with this? Well, again, so this is Velocity's process. Starting again at that discovery phase. What is the current value of your organization? How are you performing today? What's your performance like in each of those 7 areas? And then taking the time to craft a strong strategic plan based on where you're at and where you want to be, and breaking it out. And especially, I love, again, that a lot of you were looking at 3 to 5 years. That's a great runway. 5 years is really great. So it's going to take you that long to get this done. So start now, develop a strong strategic plan, map out where you want to be, bring in your advisors as needed to help get that done. And then you're going to spend the next 3 to 5 years really executing on that, and then moving through the transition. When you get close to that transition period, that's when you really want to start thinking about, okay, how am I going to communicate this out to the organization? How am I going to prepare this organization for that transition? You'll be doing it all along, but getting closer to that transition is really when you start paying attention to that process. And then you bring it, like I said, you bring in your advisors as needed to move through it. And you should be doing this. You should be in a much better state than you would be if you weren't. Is there any closing comments, Bob and Mike, that you'd like to add? Because I'm looking at our time and we're pushing up close to 11.
Just going to add real quick, and this is, we obviously work closely with Velocity, and this is the same process that we generally use. But I just want to add, if you're 1 year out and thinking I've got to sell within 1 year, all is not lost. There's still things that we can, do to mitigate some of the issues that may not have been there in the past. We may not have the time to drive the value, but there are things, and even I've even had situations of being 6 months out and saying, let's just sit down and work through everything. Let's mitigate, let's work through, let's get things together, prepare the message, and do this the right way, the best that we can within that time. So all is not lost. Like Heather said, 3 to 5 years is great. That gives us plenty of time to really fix issues, run issues through the accounting if need be, get all the structure in place. But you know, I just think just that final message of all is not lost, even if you are within
Yes.
a year.
I mean, yeah, I did it in a little over a year. It would have been a lot better if I had done it in a, 3 to 5 years, but it can be done. You can still come out on top, but bring in help.
The best guidance that I've ever kind of provided to folks is build your business like you're going to sell it, and build your business like you're going to keep it. And I have a client that's been doing that. And in the last 3 weeks, he has an offer on the table and may be able to close in 30 to 60 days, but it's solely because he's built the business like he's going to keep it and built the business like he's going to sell it.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Heather, thank you very much. That was very informative. Those 7 value drivers are exactly the things that we focus on all the time, and that will really help a business be successful, I think, as they push towards transitioning it. That said, there were no other questions along the way. Bob, thanks for also chiming in as well. We're going to take about a 6-minute break, and then we will be jumping back in right at the top of the hour to continue on with choosing the successor and preparing the successor. So
All right. See you in a few.